There are moments in politics when the mask slips, when the calm, rehearsed statements are replaced by something raw and unfiltered. And a few days ago, we witnessed exactly that, because Donald Trump didn't just respond to criticism. He erupted. He accused sitting U.S. senators of committing seditious behavior punishable by death. He reposted a message calling for them to be hanged, and in that instant something shifted. This wasn't normal political anger. This wasn't standard Trump rhetoric. This felt like a desperate man pushed to the edge, lashing out in a way that even his closest allies couldn't explain. And the more you look at what triggered this, the clearer the story becomes. Because no matter how Trump tried to spin it, the truth is simple. Someone challenged his control and he snapped. But this is only where the story begins. It began with something so routine, so ordinary that nobody in Washington expected it to spark an explosion. A small group of Democratic senators, most of them veterans, intelligence officers, or longtime national security experts, released a simple PSA to members of the U.S. military. The message wasn't political, it wasn't provocative, it wasn't even unusual. All they said was this: if you receive an illegal order, you must refuse it. That's not opinion. That's the law. It's the foundation of military ethics. Every service member hears it again and again from the moment they lace up their boots. But for Donald Trump, this basic reminder hit like a direct shot to his authority. And instead of responding with facts or reason, he detonated. Within hours, he blasted out a furious post accusing these senators of committing seditious behavior punishable by death. He didn't stop there. He amplified a message calling for them to be hanged, as if political disagreement should now be met with execution. The reaction was instant. Legal experts, former officials, and even quiet Republicans were stunned. Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor and Army veteran, said Trump had gone off the rails. He called the statement reckless, dangerous, and something no president or former president had ever dared to say. Because this wasn't a debate about policy. This was a man demanding absolute obedience and threatening death when he didn't get it. It didn't matter that the senators were stating a basic truth. It didn't matter that soldiers must refuse unlawful orders. What mattered was that Trump felt challenged. And when Trump feels challenged, he doesn't argue, he strikes. He attacks, he escalates. And this moment, more than anything, showed the world exactly how far he's willing to go when someone gets in the way of the control he thinks he deserves. For most Americans, the senator's message sounded obvious. Service members swear an oath to the Constitution, not to any individual leader. But for Trump, that reminder wasn't harmless. It was a direct threat to the one thing he relies on more than anything: unquestioned loyalty. And that's exactly why he erupted with such intensity. Glenn Kirschner, who served years as an Army JAG officer, explained this better than anyone. From day one, every soldier is taught that patently unlawful orders must be disobeyed. It's a core principle drilled into trainees repeatedly. Soldiers aren't machines. They aren't programmed to follow a human being. They are defenders of a document. And when an order violates that document, they're obligated to refuse it, even if it means punishment. So when those senators repeated this basic rule publicly, they touched a nerve Trump never wanted exposed. Because if soldiers remember they can legally refuse illegal commands, it strips Trump of something he has always demanded: absolute obedience, no questions asked. And Glenn didn't hesitate to say it. Trump wants loyalty to himself, not the Constitution. He wants military members who will carry out whatever he orders, regardless of legality. That's why his reaction wasn't political, it was personal. The PSA didn't undermine the military. It undermined his fantasy of command. It reminded the armed forces that they answer to the law, not to him. And for a man who has built his image around dominance, that reminder is intolerable. But it also revealed something deeper, something Trump may have accidentally admitted through his own panic. You don't explode like that unless you fear disobedience. You don't threaten senators with death unless you believe the military might reject you when it counts. And that fear, more than anything, showed just how unstable his grip on power has become. Just when Trump's online eruption seemed bizarre enough on its own, another detail snapped into focus. And suddenly everything made sense. Only a few days before accusing U.S. senators of seditious behavior punishable by death, Trump hosted someone in the Oval Office who has built an entire reputation on silencing critics with brutality. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. MBS isn't just another foreign leader. He's a figure U.S. intelligence agencies linked directly to the killing and dismemberment of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. He's a man who rules through fear, control, and unquestioned obedience, exactly the qualities Trump has publicly admired for years. And Glenn Kirschner didn't hesitate to point out the timing. Because the moment MBS left Washington, Trump suddenly began echoing the kind of rhetoric used by authoritarian rulers who eliminate political opponents, not debate them. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't coded. It was a former president openly suggesting that critics should face death. Glenn put it even more bluntly, Trump wasn't just praising MBS, he was emulating him. The language, the threats, the escalation, it all felt like Trump was borrowing straight from the strongman playbook. As if meeting with someone who has used violence to maintain power reminded him of a reality he's been trying to recreate. A leader who commands absolute loyalty and punishes dissent without limitations. But this shift wasn't just disturbing, it was revealing. Because if Trump admired MBS for his ability to silence critics, then reacting to a harmless PSA with death threats starts to look less like an outburst and more like imitation. And that raises a chilling possibility. If Trump is modeling himself after leaders who rule through fear, what does that say about the kind of power he wants if he ever gets the chance again? As Trump's rhetoric grew darker, a far more alarming story began unfolding behind the scenes, one that most Americans had no idea was happening. According to Glenn Kirschner, Trump wasn't just talking like an authoritarian. He was already behaving like one, and inside the military, officers were starting to feel the pressure. Glenn said it plainly, Trump has been giving commands that violate international law. Orders that ignore military rules of engagement, disregard constitutional limits, and clash directly with the laws governing warfare. These weren't small technical issues. They were serious breaches, actions no commander should ever demand from U.S. service members. And this is where the real crisis started. Inside the military, officers were reportedly split. Some recognized these commands as unlawful and wanted no part of them. Others, fearing retaliation or career consequences, felt trapped. And then there were those who, according to Glenn, seemed disturbingly willing to follow Trump no matter what he asked. This wasn't speculation. 2 soldiers even went public saying that if Trump ordered them to deploy illegally onto U.S. streets, specifically Chicago, they would refuse. They said it on camera, proudly, openly. And that level of defiance sent shockwaves through the chain of command. Because the moment soldiers publicly say they're prepared to disobey, it means something is deeply wrong. Glenn described it as an internal fight, constitutional loyalty versus personal loyalty. And Trump could sense that loyalty drifting away from him. That, more than anything else, explains the panic in his voice, the fury in his posts, and the desperation behind every threat. If the military questions him, he loses everything. If they refuse him, his power collapses. And in Trump's world, the fear of losing control is the one thing he cannot tolerate. While Trump was demanding absolute obedience, something far more important was happening quietly in the background. Something that gave soldiers a lifeline when they felt trapped between their duty and an illegal command. Glenn Kirschner called it one of the most critical resources for today's military, the Orders Project. This organization operates 24/7, offering real-time legal guidance to service members who believe they're being asked to do something unlawful. It's not political, it's not partisan. It's a safeguard built exactly for moments like this when the chain of command becomes tangled with politics, confusion, or pressure from above. Because here's the truth, Glenn explained. Disobeying a clearly illegal order isn't just allowed, it's required. But knowing that doesn't make the situation easier. When a superior officer gives an order, hesitation can feel like disloyalty. Questioning it can feel dangerous. And refusing it can feel career-ending. Many soldiers don't know where to turn or how to navigate the consequences. That's where the Orders Project steps in. They counsel troops on exactly what counts as an illegal order, how to refuse it properly, and how to protect themselves from retaliation. And more importantly, they remind service members of something Trump wants them to forget. Loyalty is to the Constitution, not to any individual, especially not to a leader who demands blind obedience. Glenn also explained the flip side. Following an unlawful order doesn't shield you from responsibility. The military won't accept "I was just following orders" if the command was blatantly illegal. The My Lai case, he reminded everyone, proved that decades ago. So soldiers today are caught between danger on both sides, punishment if they obey something illegal, punishment if they refuse incorrectly. And that is exactly why the Orders Project has become a quiet but critical force. Because in a moment where Trump is pushing boundaries and testing limits, this one resource ensures America's soldiers still have a way to do the right thing, no matter who tries to pressure them. If Trump's meltdown seemed sudden, the truth is the pressure had been building for days, maybe weeks. And by the time he accused senators of seditious behavior punishable by death, he wasn't reacting from strength, he was reacting from collapse. Glenn Kirschner and Brian both pointed to the same thing: Trump is losing on every front. Politically, his poll numbers have been sliding. Not dramatically at first, but steadily enough for him to feel the ground shifting beneath him. Every new survey shows cracks, subtle drops in independence, weakening support in suburban areas, even murmurs within his own party. Trump sees these numbers, and he knows exactly what they mean. Legally, things are even worse. Court rulings, investigations, rulings stacking up, all of it tightening around him. Glenn pointed out that in just recent days, Trump suffered multiple legal setbacks, each one chipping away at the image of invincibility he tries to maintain. Every decision against him is another reminder that the system he's tried to bend can still push back, but nothing compared to the humiliation he suffered in Congress. When the Epstein file vote hit the floor, the result wasn't close. It wasn't partisan, it was 427 to 1 in the House and unanimous in the Senate. A direct blow to Trump because he fought to keep those files hidden more than anyone. Bryan reminded viewers why. Trump's name appears over 1,000 times in those documents, with FBI agents specifically assigned to flag every reference. Trump knows what's in those files, he knows what could be revealed, and he knows how damaging it might be. So when the vote went against him massively, something snapped, the mask cracked, and his rage shifted from political enemies to anyone threatening his control, especially the military. This wasn't power. This was panic disguised as strength. As Trump's world tightened around him, polls slipping, courts pushing back, Congress humiliating him, one truth became impossible to ignore. He was running out of ways to hold onto power. And according to Glenn Kirschner, Trump has finally realized something terrifying. If he can't win through politics and he can't survive through the legal system, then the only path left is control of the military. That's the fear driving every one of his recent outbursts, because Trump has always believed loyalty is everything. Not loyalty to the country, not loyalty to the Constitution, loyalty to him. And for years, he treated the military as a personal tool, not a national institution. He wanted officers who followed him, not the law. He wanted troops who would ignore legal boundaries and act on his word alone. So when Democratic senators reminded soldiers that they must refuse illegal orders, Trump didn't hear a PSA. He heard a threat to his last remaining lifeline. A warning that if he tried to use the military to hold onto power in any unlawful way, they might not follow him. They might resist. They might even expose him. That's why he reacted with such violent language, calling their words seditious, claiming they should be punished by death, reposting a call for them to be hanged. This wasn't political messaging. It was a man terrified of losing the one institution he believes could save him. Glenn explained it bluntly. Trump knows that without the military's obedience, he has no path to reclaim or retain power. And as more officers speak openly about refusing illegal commands, Trump's panic only grows louder. Because in his mind, if the military won't protect him, then nothing will. And that realization is pushing him toward more extreme, more dangerous rhetoric, desperation dressed up as authority. When you step back and look at everything together, the threats, the rage, the obsession with loyalty, a clearer picture emerges. This isn't the behavior of a confident leader. It's the behavior of someone watching his influence shrink and grasping at whatever he can to hold on to it. Trump's attack on senators wasn't about sedition. It wasn't about national security. And it certainly wasn't about the law. It was a panicked reaction from a man terrified that the last institution he depends on, the military, may no longer follow him blindly. Glenn Kirschner called it what it is: a sign of unfitness, desperation, and a willingness to cross lines no president has ever dared cross. Because when a leader starts talking casually about executing lawmakers for speaking the truth, something fundamental has shifted. That kind of rhetoric doesn't come from strength, it comes from fear. Trump is losing politically, legally, and publicly. His poll numbers are slipping. Court decisions keep stacking against him. The Epstein file vote embarrassed him on a national scale. And inside the military, the one place he believed he still held control, officers are openly acknowledging their duty to resist unlawful commands. That reality terrifies him. Because a leader who dreams of absolute authority cannot survive in a system where the military answers to the Constitution instead of him. And that's exactly what these senators reminded the country. We are still a nation of laws, not loyalty pledges, so the conclusion is simple but powerful. Trump's recent behavior isn't a show of dominance. It's the last stage of a man watching his power slip away. And the more desperate he becomes, the more dangerous his words get. But in the end, the system he's trying to bend may be the very system that stops him.